Have you ever looked at a poll and wondered how on earth can they predict an entire election by talking to just 1,000 people? Or how do we know these big national health trends without asking every single person in the country? Well, it's not magic. It's actually a really powerful tool called sampling, and it's all about knowing the whole by looking at one really carefully chosen part. So let's break down exactly how it works.
Right? It's a question that just feels weird. It seems almost impossible that the opinions of 1,000 people could really truly speak from millions. It might sound like some kind of statistical trick, but today we're going to pull back the curtain and show you the science behind how a small group can accurately speak for a massive one.
You know, the easiest way to wrap your head around this is with an analogy you can probably taste right now. Think about it. You don't need to drink an entire pot of soup to know if you've added enough salt, right? You just need one well-stirred spoonful. If that spoonful, your sample, is taken the right way, it tells you everything you need to know about the whole pot.
Now, to see this in the real world, let's look at a pretty cool example. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had a problem. Sales of their duck stamps, which, by the way, fund really important wetland conservation, were going down. They had to figure out what people thought so they could fix it, but they couldn't just ask every American. So what they do? You guessed it, they use sampling. We're going to use this lame duck study as our running example to make all these ideas really stick.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We've had our spoonful of soup. That's our big idea. Next, we'll get into the first big decision. Should you talk to just a few people or everyone? Then we'll walk through a 5-step plan for doing it right. After that, we'll dig into the huge difference between using chance and using choice to pick your sample. And we'll wrap it all up with what I think is the most important part, what polls don't say and what you should be looking for.
So, let's say you want to understand a group of people. Right away, you are facing a massive choice. Do you try to talk to every single person? That's a census. Or do you talk to a smaller, much more manageable group? That's a sample. First things first, let's get our terms straight, because these words are going to pop up a lot. The population, that's the entire group you're interested in. Every single citizen, every potential customer, the whole shebang. A census is when you try to do the impossible and collect data from every single person in that population. And a sample, that's our focus today, is a carefully chosen slice of that population that's designed to represent the whole pie.
Now you're probably thinking, a census sounds way more thorough, right? So why wouldn't we just do that all the time? Well, it turns out there are some very, very good reasons why sampling isn't just the easier option, but often it's the only real choice you've got.
And this table here lays out why, perfectly. Look, a sample is your go-to when you've got a limited budget, a tight deadline, or just a massive population. A census, that's really only possible when you have incredible resources. I mean, think about the US Census. It takes a decade of planning and costs billions. For most research, that's just not happening. And here's something interesting. While samples have what's called sampling error because you're not asking everyone, a huge project like a census can have massive non-sampling errors, like typos or bad questions that can mess up the results in ways that are way harder to find and fix. Okay, so you've decided a sample is the way to go. Great. But you can't just, grab the first 10 people you see on the street. To get a reliable sample that actually means something, you need a solid, proven process. Let's walk through that 5-step plan right now.
Think of this as the blueprint for any good study. It all flows logically. First, you figure out exactly who you're studying. Then you figure out how to get a list of them. Next, you pick your method for choosing who's in and who's out. After that, you decide how many people you actually need. And finally, you go out and do it. Step 1 is all about being super precise. You have to be crystal clear about the group you want to understand. So for our duck stamp study, the target population wasn't just Americans. No way. It was defined as the male or female head of U.S. households with a working telephone during a specific period. Every single one of those words matters. It puts a tight fence around who they were actually studying.
So, once you know who you're looking for, the sampling frame is your map for finding them. It's the actual list you're going to pull your sample from. Now, for the duck stamp study, there's no perfect phone book of every household in the U.S., so they used a computer program that could randomly generate valid phone numbers. That program was their sampling frame. And now we come to a huge, critical decision point. You know who you're looking for. You have a way to find them. But how do you actually choose which ones get into your sample? This step is so important that we're going to dedicate a whole section to it in just a minute. Step 4 is deciding how many people you need. For the duck stamp study, that magic number was 1,000. And that number wasn't just a guess. The sample size is a careful trade-off, right? You're balancing how much precision you need with the realities of your budget and your timeline. Bigger samples usually mean more accuracy, but they also mean more money and more time. And finally, step 5, execution. This is where the rubber meets the road. All that planning becomes reality. You make the calls, you send the surveys, you do the interviews. It's all about following the plan you laid out in the first 4 steps to make sure the data you get is top-notch.
All right, let's circle back to that really critical third step, how you pick your sampling technique. This decision really boils down to a fundamental fork in the road. Are you going to leave the selection process up to pure mathematical chance, or are you going to use your own judgment to make the choice?
This diagram shows the 2 great families of sampling. Everything starts with that first big split, non-probability versus probability. See how everything else flows from that one decision? From there, each of those branches breaks down into its own set of specific methods, which we'll take a peek at now.
So what's the real difference here? Well, with non-probability sampling, the researcher uses their own personal judgment or just what's convenient. Maybe they survey students in their own class or people at the local mall. It's subjective. But with probability sampling, the selection is totally random. Every single person in the population has a known calculable chance of being picked, kind of like drawing names out of a hat. This is what the duck stamp study used because it's the only way you can really generalize your findings to everybody else.
This slide gives you a great visual for these 2 approaches. On the left, with non-probability, the researcher is actively choosing. Maybe they're picking what they think are typical examples, or just grabbing whoever's easy to reach. But on the right, with probability methods, the selections are made by pure chance from the whole group. One is based on human choice, the other is all about the math of random chance.
So, which one's better? Well, it really depends on what you're trying to do. If you're in the early stages, just exploring an idea, or you need results fast and cheap, non-probability can be super useful. But if you need to make conclusions that you can confidently say apply to the whole population, like in a political poll or that duck stamp study, then you absolutely have to use the statistical power that only probability sampling gives you.
Wow, okay, we've covered a ton of ground from tasting soup all the way to a detailed 5-step plan. So what's the bottom line? What are the most important things to remember the next time you see a poll or a research study pop up in the news?
Here's the most crucial takeaway. A poll's headline number is just the tip of the iceberg. The real story, the part that gives that number all its credibility, is hidden in the methods. You have to ask, was the population clearly defined? Was the list they used to find people a good one? And most important of all, did they use a probability method where everyone had a fair shot at being included? Knowing to ask these questions makes you a smart, critical judge of data, not just a passive consumer of headlines.
And that's really what it's all about. The real power isn't just in knowing the final number, it's in understanding how they got there. So the next time you see a headline about what the public thinks, I hope you'll have a new question in your mind. How exactly did they stir the pot, and how did they pick that spoonful of soup? Thanks for joining us.